Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ken Calvert. I'm in an unusually good mood today, and welcome to the Father Joe Podcast.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, Father Joe Grimaldi across from me right now. Father Joe Podcast proudly supported by Houghton McInerney Star Lincoln 12 Mile Road and Telegraph in Southfield. Mention you heard about Star Lincoln on the Father Joe Podcast, and you will receive the Father Joe Star treatment. Make sure you check out the all-new Nautilus and MKC. Houghton McInerney Star Lincoln, they're at 12 Mile and Telegraph in Southfield. You know that. They've been there for over 50 years. We're going to talk about the Feast of St. Francis.
Correct, yeah.
This is a big, big feast day.
Sure it is.
They're all big.
Yeah, but St. Francis is very, very special because it's not only the Catholics who revere him, but other religions also revere Francis. He has this charismatic appeal to so many people of different faiths, and I think particularly because of his gentle way of approaching life, and yet he was a fierce fighter for the church.
October 4th is the Feast of St. Francis.
Correct.
If everything works out correctly, people who are listening to this podcast will be hearing it on October 4th. So you'll be hearing it on the actual day of the feast.
Yes.
You were saying that there is a large association with the animals, the critters, and St. Francis, correct?
Oh, very much so, yeah, because every year there is the blessing of the animals, and it's very dear to the hearts of a lot of people, particularly today when animals have become a very important source of comfort to many people in the world.
Yes.
So on the Feast of St. Francis, not only the Catholic Church, but also many of the Protestant churches will bless the animals. So people bring their animals to the church to have Father bless them, or the minister bless them, or whatever the case might be. Now, because we like our convenience, people very often will have the blessing of the animals on the Saturday before or the Saturday after, or maybe even Sunday afternoon or Sunday before the feast itself. But I have some wonderful memories of celebrating Francis. I was stationed in a rural area in California.
Was that Corralitos?
Corralitos, yeah. And what was interesting is that whenever we had the blessing of the animals, and because the area was rural, people brought horses and donkeys, and they brought dogs and cats and snakes and birds and everything you can imagine. Yeah. We were surrounded like Dr. Doolittle would be surrounded with all of these different animals.
You were Father Jack Hanna.
Yes, and here I was blessing all these animals on that special day. And also I made sure to have a little holy card with Francis on it to distribute to the people in honor of the day. But I want to go a step further because the Feast of St. Francis is so important. When I lived in Rome, and I was there for 3 years, but on the feast itself, I would take the train to go up to Assisi. And Assisi is about a 2-hour train ride from Rome. And I would be there to celebrate the Feast of Francis. Well, let me put it this way. Part of me loved being there, but the other part of me said, I did it once, I don't want to do it again. Because it was so crowded. People were standing, my God, there was no room between them. There was so many. I'm speaking about hundreds of thousands of people. And the reason for that, one of the reasons for that, is the popularity of St. Francis, number one, but also because St. Francis is one of the patron saints of Italy. And so all of the different provinces throughout Italy would send, this happens every year, would send delegations to celebrate the feast to the Church of St. Francis in Assisi. We had people not only from Italy, but people who were devoted to Francis. We had people from Germany, from Belgium, and so on and so forth. Europe is sending everybody over. But it was a beautiful, beautiful day, packed, though, to the point where you could hardly breathe.
Right.
That's how many people there. I want to go back a little bit about Francis when he was alive, because we're talking about 12th to 13th century. Here's Francis, very, very wealthy family, merchants in Assisi, very wealthy. And he, of course, defies his family because they expected something different from him. Instead, he wanted to be a follower of Jesus Christ himself. And so he would go around town dressed in very simple robes, if you want, the most simple you could possibly want. But while he was praying, there's something called the cross of St. Francis, the Damiano cross is what it's called. He was praying, and he had apparition, if you want, of the Lord saying to him, Francis, build my church. Well, it so happens that Francis looked around and he says, well, it's not that bad, but if it has to be built, we'll look at. The Lord says to him further, build my church. It happened that at that time, the church was suffering. It was a mess. There was all sorts of anti-this and anti-that. Just as the church is suffering today, Francis was called to build the church. Where Francis at first thought the physical church, the Lord was speaking about the church. The church are the people of God. Mm-hmm. And what Francis was asked to do is do something about the faith of the people of the church, not necessarily the building. I mean, if you did the building, that's something else. But Francis fought for a lot of reformation in the Catholic Church, so much so he went to see the Pope in Rome to do this, that, or the other thing, to bring people back to their original faith, to people be strong in their faith. In any case...
Wait a minute. I got two questions for you.
Yes.
First one, what gave him the right to ask for a meeting with the Pope?
You're speaking about 12th and 13th century.
Okay.
Life is different.
All right.
He walked on foot.
Right.
That's a 2-hour car drive.
Was he famous? I mean,
well, he was becoming famous, but that didn't make him.
Okay.
He was like a bum, actually.
Yeah.
He wore these torn clothes. He traveled barefoot. And here he is coming from
high class, and
he gave all that up, and his family wanted to disown him completely.
Okay.
And so anyway, he embraced the cross of Christ. He wanted to be like Jesus himself, giving himself up for the people. By the way, as an aside, right next door was a woman by the name of Clare. So St. Clare of Assisi was his best friend. She was the foundress of the Poor Clares, which is a Franciscan route. Are you familiar with the nuns called the Poor Clares? They have a lot of nursing homes, devote themselves to the poor. So she was, if you want, somebody that worked with Francis and knew. Yeah. So anyway...
so he gets to the Pope.
Yeah, he gets to the Pope, and they do come up with certain reformations at that time for the...
so he becomes an ambassador for...
As it were.
Right.
Yeah. But basically, Francis's life is a life to be imitated for his simplicity, his interest in embracing the poor and helping the poor in any way he could. St. Clare of Assisi was the same way, and so she also became a foundress. He founded the Order of St. Francis, which is divided into 3 different sections, as I mentioned in a previous podcast. But here's another thing I have to say about Francis. I know we're only in October, and already in the department stores, Christmas is very much alive and well. And I call it the C word. We shouldn't use the C word till Christmas Eve, but we use it. Uh-huh. But anyway, he's famous for Christmas, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
There's a town in Italy which is like the belly button of Italy. It's right in the center of Italy.
Okay.
And it's called Greccio. And Francis, one time at Christmas, formed a human creche. You had the stable, if you want, but it was a cave, actually. You have the shepherds. You have the poor were gathered there around this little, how should I put it? Almost like a bed of hay there in the cave. And so during the Mass, what happens? Jesus Christ, the infant Jesus, appears. Now that's the beginning of what we call the creche, the Christmas creche, which is the stable and the, everybody, not everybody, but so many people at Christmas time like to have not just the Christmas tree, but also the creche where you have Jesus and you have Mary and Joseph.
Right.
And you have, but he...
Commonly known as the nativity scene.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so at that time, he had the Blessed Mother, he had St. Joseph, but basically Jesus appeared as a human baby in that little, in the stable.
No
But from
kidding.
then on, of course, people have the creche. That's a French word, but basically it's the same thing as you just mentioned. It's the nativity scene.
Okay.
But it's this little town of Greccio is where it started. And if you look up Greccio, you'll see that it's right at the center of Italy, and that's where Francis began the creche, the custom of having a creche, because that was a human creche, but after that people made little replicas.
Okay. Where do the animals fit into this?
Well, because it was a cave,
Right.
animals were coming in,
Right.
and he welcomed them all.
Naturally, that's the way that was their form of transportation.
Yeah, but even even besides the transportation, you had the chicken and you had the, you know what I mean?
Sure, of course.
So, but Francis,
You had the sheep, you had the
but
goat.
also, but Francis also was someone who not only embraced the poor and also the marginal people that nobody would deal with, but he also welcomed animals of all sorts. And so in his lifetime, he's noted for being gentle also to animals. Yeah. And so today, that's one of the things we take away is his interest. But we have to look deeper into Francis because he's responsible for the 13th century Reformation of the church. Because he helped Jesus build the church. If you ever go to Assisi, there are two levels, basically. There's the basic level where the train station is, but then you have to go up to the top of the hill, and you have the church of St. Francis, you have the church of St. Damien, which is not the Damien the leper, but a different Damien. Mm-hmm. But that's where the cross that Francis prayed under is there, and you have the convent of St. Clare and so on. These things are existing on the upper level. It's a beautiful area to visit because it's just beautifully laid out as a town.
Yeah.
Then in the main church on the first level, when you go in, there is a section that has, within the church, they rebuilt a little chapel so that today visitors go in, and you could go into that little chapel, and that's where they remember Francis listening to the Lord say, "Build my church." But Jesus wasn't talking about physical church. He was talking about the uplifting the whole idea of church.
The Reformation.
Yes. It's not the major Reformation that took place. A Reformation of the church.
Yeah. Okay, then I do have two more, all right?
Sure.
And I'll make them quick.
No, we have time.
Well, no, we do have time. we're doing pretty good here. Not on time, but we're doing pretty well here with the conversation. Before I get to Pope Francis and why he took that name, and I think you'll probably say, well, I've basically given you the reasons, or some of the reasons why. Do they still bless the animals around the feast day of St. Francis?
Oh, definitely.
Oh, they do? Okay.
If you go around, they'll even have street signs saying, Saturday we'll have the blessing of the animals. St. James Episcopal, you have it over at the St. Francis. I mean, all the different churches have it. They're not required.
Kids bring their hamsters and they bring their dogs and they bring their cats.
But they're not required to do that, but they can.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the churches. But I might think almost every church.
I think that's wonderful. I think that's great.
Every church has that.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll, because of the numbers and the different animals, they'll have it in the parking lot of the church. And so it certainly takes place. Actually, it's more popular now than ever.
All right, well, and I'm glad, because you're right about the comfort dog situation.
Oh, yes.
The rescue dogs.
And even cats that are, for some people, cats are the comfort animal and so on.
Yeah, the Troy Police Department just adopted a cat. Yeah, I love what they're doing with the animals.
Me
I think
too.
I remember a couple of times when I was in the hospital, there was a dog named Tyler. He was a black lab, and he would come in with his little red coat on. And, the handler would say, "Would you like to visit with Tyler today?" And I said, "Would I?" And I was like, "Hello, Tyler. How are you? You're a good dog there," and just wonderful. Yeah.
When you're mentioning that, I remember during 9/11, there was a dog named Rosie, and Rosie was a black lab, and she led, I don't know how many hundreds of people to safety, leading them down the stairs. And she was later highly decorated as a first responder.
Yeah.
She was decorated by that. And so because she was a police dog, if you want, but Rosie led people to safety. So animals have a special role to play among humanity.
Oh, listen.
Francis certainly responded to that.
You're talking to a golden retriever guy.
Well,
and I'll tell you what, between Popeye and Tug, don't get me going or you'll get me misting up. Finally, then, Pope Francis obviously has tremendous admiration for St. Francis.
Yeah, you know what's interesting?
Not just because he's a Franciscan now, or partially.
Who?
Isn't the Pope a Franciscan?
Not at all.
Oh,
no, that's what makes it even more interesting.
Do you want me to leave the room now?
No.
You want to finish this up on your own?
Did I use my principal voice?
Yes, you did.
I didn't mean to do so.
Well, I got to bring your volume up and bring it back down, and there'll be a couple.
You better adjust this later.
Yeah, you nailed your peaks on that one.
Sorry.
All right, so I just assumed Pope Francis was a Franciscan.
No, and this is what makes it more salient, because Francis is a Jesuit, which in a way...
I should have known that.
We look at the Jesuits, the highly intellectual, the people that deal with university, colleges, and so on, higher learning, and Francis has all of that. But when he became Pope, he chose the name Francis. Francis. It's not Francis the First. They don't say Francis the First until there's a Francis the Second. So he's the first one to choose that name because he felt that it was his mission in life to emphasize care for the marginal people, care for those who are hurting, care for the poor, care for those who nobody will look at, care for those people who are suffering in the midst of Africa and India and
around the world.
He embraces that. Mm-hmm. And he does that also with his documents, which not everybody agrees with. I mean, very often people involved in business say he should stay out of that. It's not his role to do that, but he feels it is. I have a feeling that when you look at Francis and you look at what he does and people complain about it, if it were Jesus Christ, they would also complain about it because Jesus chose the marginal. He chose the people that nobody else would deal with, and that's what he embraced. All right, maybe that's just one reason Pope Francis chose that name.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling it's the major reason. He was and he is still very sensitive to those who are marginal, those who are not accepted by society, and he wants to do the best he can to embrace them.
Wow. Nice job. Ladies and gentlemen, you are dismissed.
Anyway.
I just feel...
I am sorry.
No, you did. We're going to wrap right there. Happy St. Francis Day.
I wish you the same.
To all of you out there as well, be safe, and as always, thank you for dialing by and listening to the Father Joe podcast, being brought to us by, of course, proudly supported, I should mention, by Hoot McInerney Star Lincoln, 12 Mile Road and Telegraph in Southfield. Mention you heard about Star Lincoln on the Father Joe podcast and get the Father Joe Star treatment. Hoot McInerney's Star Lincoln, 12 Mile and Telegraph in Southfield. Did you have a good time?
I did, and thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, and thanks to everybody for listening.
Happy St. Francis Day.
Happy St. Francis Day. We'll see you next time on the Father Joe podcast.
Take care. This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe podcast.
If you'd like, you can email us. It's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. That's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook. Simply search Father Joe Grimaldi. And thanks for listening, everyone.